All right, we're live. We're live. We're live. All right. Hello. We're captains. This is DockerCon, and we're talking live from the show floor. This is in the hallway track area where everybody hangs out and chats one-on-one and in little groups. Oh. And looks like we've got an echo. All right. So let's jump into the live dashboard. That's talking. All right. Live dashboard doesn't let me do anything. There's no live dashboard.
I'm just showing you your office center.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's not working, so we'll go over here. All right, so later in the show, we're going to take your questions. So if you have questions, get them in the chat now. That's sort of the standard rule on Thursdays, is this is Q&A. So if you have questions about DockerCon or announcements or products or just DevOps questions, that's what we're here for. So I'm Brett, and this is my channel. And if you've not been here before, I do this every Thursday. I have sometimes guests. Sometimes we just hang out and chat in the Q&A and talk. I basically answer your questions. Sometimes I talk about news, and I have awesome people like these captains here. So, hello, and who are you?
Hi, Brett. Thanks for having me on the live show at DockerCon. I'm Nirmal Mehta. I'm a Docker captain. Live in Durham, North Carolina, and super happy to be with you again in the second week.
Yeah.
Did you say your name?
I did.
He did. He told them who he was.
And I'm Nils, also like third or fourth time now.
Yeah, at least. I've been on your channel, you've been on my channel.
So we do this thing. From Belgium, run the meetup there, long-time Docker user.
Yes, WordPress Docker expert.
Yeah, I'm trying to cut down on that. So
You're trying to cut down on the WordPress?
Let's not mention the WordPress
Okay,
today.
sorry. If you have WordPress questions, we will
Not
take
me.
them, but he won't answer them. So, all right, so we've got lots of people behind us. People are in session right now. It's the morning sessions. This is actually the repeat day, so at DockerCon, if you do really well and you get voted top 10 or 15, you get to do it all again and repeat your
How
effort.
do you vote, by the way, through the app?
In the app,
In the
yeah.
app, yeah.
People, and I always forget to ask people to do it, so, yeah.
That's why you're here podcasting and not
Yes.
giving your talk.
So,
I think it's one of the coolest things about DockerCon that they do this repeat day.
yeah.
I've seen it now at other conferences, but I think it might have started here.
I think we were trendsetters.
I think so, maybe.
Yeah,
But
well, that's
I
Ashlyn
like
and
it.
Jenny and all the
Yeah,
other people
'cause
that
it-
were. Yeah,
You know, you can't always get to every talk, and now you get to
yeah, and you don't always know which are the best ones before you're looking at them, right?
Correct,
So
yeah.
the best ones get voted up, and you know it's the cream rises to the top, and then on Thursday you get the best of the best. And
I definitely rated your talk 5 stars, but
thank you.
apparently that wasn't enough.
one person giving me 5 stars did not make it into the cut.
But you were also last on the last day, so
Yes.
kind of
Oh yeah.
have a disadvantage of time.
Maybe
Or-
I didn't
or is
take
it-
time for questions, so I didn't give people a chance. Like we rushed out of the room.
Yeah.
I talked on Docker for Node.js, so it was all. I'm assuming all Node.js people in the room. So obviously that limits your audience to just one programming language. So yeah, it was a lot of fun though. All these sessions will be back up on Docker's YouTube channel, usually within a couple of weeks. I don't have a quote on that, but if you missed DockerCon this year, don't worry. Some of the videos most of the videos I think would be on the YouTube eventually. So.
Yep.
All right, so let's
So-
talk about stuff.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Brett. What was your favorite session? Did you get it? Well, first
First
of all,
off, I did not go to any sessions.
because you've been working really hard.
Yeah, I've been doing all that stuff all week, like the rest of us. Like, did you go to a session?
I did. Yeah, Ian Coldwater, and she was talking about the Kubernetes CVE, like the
Oh, the vulnerability.
vulnerability that was recently
Mhm.
like discovered. I wasn't there the whole entire time, but it was a great talk, and I can't wait to read see the recording so I can get the last bit of it. But
Right.
She was a great speaker, and Laura Frank talking
the
with
CI/CD?
Ollie. Yes, that was awesome talk.
Recently? It again today.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
And there was a lot of, obviously it was a packed room. She said it was standing room only, and so a lot of people, I think, we were talking about this the other night. A lot of people are wondering if like continuous integration and automated deployments are really like the next tech opportunity. It seems like there's startups happening. Companies are innovating and releasing new products to replace old products. It's still a really hard thing.
It looks like there's a lot of room for improvement. Apparently, I know Laura working at CloudBees is in that space, but there seems to be a lot of activity this year.
Yeah.
And excited to see what comes out of that.
Yeah, it's the next thing in the pipeline that slows things down, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. That's my theory. So we can get the programming, like this is like the next thing.
Like brain computer interface, right to the.
Yeah, they just write the programs for us.
Yeah,
and
you just think about it. That's the future.
Thinking and apps appear. You know how many Twitter clones we'd have if we could just think of an app and then it happens.
Yeah, because we're all the centers of our universes.
So, we had workshops this week. Did you take any workshops, or were you in any workshops?
No, but I know that both of you worked on a workshop. How'd that go?
We did a Swarm workshop, and great audiences both times. We actually did it twice, and people were interested in Swarm. There were some people in there that definitely knew Kubernetes, so they were in there to learn the differences and understand the differences. But there was a lot of people in there that it was like, these are the enterprise companies and they're just now getting to containers, right? So they're in there, and several people came up at the end and said, I'm just getting started in Docker. And then they came to an orchestration workshop as their intro to Docker. And they were like, how do I get started with just Docker? So I talked about my courses and other free resources that the captains provide. But there's still a ton of people here that this is like their entry. This is their year to start looking at containers. A lot of us have been doing it for years and years, but
Yeah, then that's something we already talked about a couple of times. Also at meetups, you see the same pattern. Like every time I ask when running a meetup, like who's new to this, like never touched Docker or barely touched Docker, there's always almost 50% of the room entirely new. So it's still a growing ecosystem. I guess still at the infancy of containers and the whole everything around that.
It's tricky to, we've been working in this space for, some of us for almost 6 years now, and it's tricky to remember that there's so many beginners still.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that there always will be with every technology, right? A certain percentage will always be new.
Yeah. Someone out there is new to Windows NT and just starting.
Maybe not Windows NT. You're doing a throwback right there. It is Throwback Thursday. So.
Somewhere out there, someone's fixing something on an ATM running Windows NT.
NT4.
Yep, with networking.
With the start button. Right. All right, so we have lots of announcements from this week. There is definitely a lot of product demos. We saw everything from them demoing a new version of Docker Enterprise called 3.0 that's going to have a bunch of stuff in it that I can't even remember all. They've got new command line options and plugins that are going to start adding functionality to Docker command line. What was your exciting takeaway from the product demos and stuff? So
enterprise is not something I listen very carefully to because I'm not an enterprise customer.
Right.
I think the
it was down here.
No. So one probably exciting thing is the whole ARM announcement, where they're first of all announcing that they partnered with ARM, the how do you call that, chipset manufacturer.
Yeah, they're like a
licensing
designer.
The chip architects.
Oh man.
But then also a lot of tooling around that to build your images, because it's another type of chipset. Your images need to be rebuilt specifically for that. So a bunch of tooling around that. There was something with, I couldn't pick it up very well, like Docker Jump, where you can provision whatever instance type. It looks
it looks like a provisioned instances. Which it looks like a command line plugin. So there's Docker app as a command line plugin. There's Docker, what's the one that you switch environments now? Context. Context. I think that's a plugin. We actually have it.
There was Build X, right?
Build X, which I think is a plugin. Why not just do this right on the fly? If you do a Docker command now, the internet can't see this, but
oh, there you go. You scroll down. There's all the new ones.
Yeah. So there's there's a new Docker app command, a new Docker build X command, and those are plugins, and I think that's how you can recognize the plugin. So I guess the jump was another plugin.
Yep.
I felt like there was probably another plugin, and I don't know how to make plugins. I don't know how to put them in Docker, but evidently now it ships with them, some of them, and you can add more. So it would be interesting to have a Terraform plugin, and I don't really understand why like everything's going into the Docker command line. So clearly there's got to be some reason to put these things in the command line
I mean,
instead of their own apps, instead of their own command.
Yeah, isn't that they're always like batteries included but swappable kind of mindset?
Like
I think it starts in the command line and then eventually, that's the API, right?
Right,
Like
right.
then
maybe
it
it's
gets
easier
to
to
a
write.
GUI at some point, right?
So maybe it's easier to add functionality at the CLI than it is to just
Yeah.
write your own app that talks to the Docker engine. Like maybe that's the.
And also like before they integrate it completely wholesale into like Docker for Windows and Docker for
Right.
Mac and things like that.
right.
So
Maybe it's plugins first, and then they make it native.
yeah, maybe.
Experiment.
There's a lot of new stuff, so we're we're still wrapping our head around it.
Yeah, and so if you're on the beta of Docker, Docker Desktop, you should see, as of the last day or two, they've updated and it's now have this new feature set on the Docker command line. So if you're interested in any of that, definitely check out the Docker Desktop beta.
And there was also managed, like there was a subscription service.
Yep,
And if you go to beta.docker.com, you can get some trial of that.
beta.docker.com.
And then on top of that, there was the ARM support and the new BuildX tool to use BuildKit to very easily do multi-platform builds.
Yeah, that was pretty neat to be able to just specify like 2 or 3 different platforms in a single
Yeah.
build command, and it builds them all concurrently. Like,
Yeah,
that was-
like on like a laptop that doesn't have that processor on it.
right, right, exactly, like magic.
And if you do have that processor somewhere out there, you can have a builder out there, and it will delegate building to
yeah,
something that has that architecture, which is there was a lot packed into there.
Right.
I think it went so smoothly that I don't think anyone
it's like okay, that looked really pretty, but I mean, does that mean eventually we're going to get to possibly like you could have a build farm, like a build cluster? Like if you can connect to
I mean,
remote
that's what-
environments that easily, then you just
I mean,
Yeah, I think so. The jump command was like, from a developer perspective, an easy way of saying, okay, I run on a Mac, so I don't have that chipset or that
Yeah.
platform. So I provision something in AWS. I guess they're the only ones right now offering ARM kind of instances, ARM-backed
Yeah,
instances.
A1,
they
the
have their
A1s.
own, they have their own
Yeah.
architecture.
So
Yeah,
and the reason
yeah.
you would go for those is for price cuts, I guess. I mean, as a normal
Yeah.
developer, if you're not too worried about, or
Yeah, they are cheaper instances.
Yeah.
One of the things that's unique about them is that they're not actually like super cheap. They're $18 a month. They start there, but they give you a full CPU. So unlike if you compare them to C instances that are the really cheap ones, those
Hyper-threaded.
those
Yeah,
those you get
virtual-
CPU credits. So you don't get
yeah.
a full CPU all the time, and the ARM ones do. So
Yeah.
if you're looking for like super low end, but you want to be certain you have a CPU,
Interesting.
it's not a dedicated instance. It's not going to give you dedicated CPU, but if you've ever tried to like run a swarm or something on the C3s, you learn very quickly that you run out of CPU credits, and then it actually stops the processor every so often to prevent you from overusing your credits, and that causes swarm problems because
Yeah.
it needs that constant every second communication. So you could build an ARM cluster on Swarm and just run a bunch of
which is kind of a new idea, I guess, because ARM was usually like in Raspberry Pis and
Yep.
IoT devices
Right.
that was their like main claim to fame. But now they're moving from the edge, from IoT devices into the data center. So
Yeah.
it's all still happening, and we'll have to see how it turns out. But
Yeah,
at
after the
least tooling is
announcement-
coming,
After the announcement, I didn't know anything about ARM in the data center. Like I knew that it was there, but I didn't know why. And I started doing a bunch of reading and looking at stuff, and it seems to me like today the A1 instances aren't. If you're just looking for like price for processing calculations, like if you're just simply looking at for the workload I need to do, is this a cheaper per CPU cycle, or however you want to look at the cost metric? The A1 chipsets that they're making are not necessarily better than the price per computing power of a regular Intel. But evidently there's a whole bunch of new ARM versions coming out that we expect new chipsets
Yep. I mean,
that supposedly will maybe up their game. So I mean, in other words, they're a lot slower than the Intel processors at most things, but they're cheaper.
Yep.
It just turns out that it's not a no-brainer.
It's not a linear.
Exactly. Like you shouldn't just go do ARM because you think it's going to be cheaper for you overall. It might not be depending on your workload. So you have to kind of do your homework and analyze your workloads and what ARM is good at. The other thing about those A1s is they have up to 10 gigabit networking. So for $16 or $18 a month, you get a dedicated CPU and really fast networking. So it might be good at like memory.
And Amazon
network
designed
intensive.
those chips
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
So they're optimized for their environment, right?
Yeah.
So there might be some more, security or other benefits that aren't
We're not
a one-for-one relationship with the current
With the
instances,
Intel, yeah.
because it's custom
Custom
hardware
silicon.
all the way. Yeah, exactly. So
I mean, and it's more options for us, the customer. Which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
always a good thing.
Yeah, I think it definitely. What's up, Dino? So, I think it's something that I think it's going to continue to expand, and we'll probably see Azure put something on. Although they had a talk last year for Azure, and someone got on stage at like an Azure conference from Microsoft and said, "We don't plan on putting ARM in the data center." I wonder if that's going to change now. They talked about how they have ARM in a whole lot of places, but they don't have it as like a compute offering because it doesn't really make sense. But now that this is all coming to fruition, it's like maybe they're going to.
That's probably going to change. I would imagine.
because they were talking about how like Microsoft partners with 3 different chip makers to make 3 different types of chips for them in ARM, for all sorts of other things, but not necessarily for customers.
I mean, they build hardware.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like the
just like
other
Google
things.
and
So I'm sure they have a relationship with ARM.
Yeah.
So-
And what was interesting to them is they were talking about it being they needed vendor. They didn't like sole sourcing issues. Like in other words, Intel's the only one that makes an Intel chip, and they needed to they needed to make sure that if there's some problem with Intel, their data centers could still grow and that they had other options. So, all right. So what else? Enterprise.
K3S. That's another thing that I went to talk to yesterday, I think.
Oh yeah. You talked about that last time.
The title was a bit misleading. It said something running Kubernetes at the edge, but then the talk was about this newish project by Rancher, one of the Docker.
K3OS.
No, K3S.
K3S.
That was their. That's their inception thing. That's Kubernetes -5, like K8S -5, K3S, and their idea is like Kubernetes from a setup perspective is a bit complex.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree to that, like a little bit. And they wanted to bring in the Docker Swarm idea of just running a couple commands and you have an entire multi-node cluster ready, and that's K3S. So it's very, they stripped out a lot of stuff from the stock Kubernetes, like plugins, beta feature, alpha features, like things you generally wouldn't use anyway in a production kind of environment. So they stripped it out entirely, made one binary, very, very lightweight, and so you can.
So does it run like as a single container?
It runs as a binary. It doesn't run in a container. It runs your containers.
Oh, okay. So it replaces Docker engine then, maybe?
You get the choice. So I think by default it uses containerd. But if you want to use Docker or any other runtime,
so it's an extra host process that.
Yeah, you just run one node, K3S agent with the token coming from the server. The Docker Swarm way.
Yeah, that's awesome.
On the agents you want to run, and that's it. Like it's literally a minute of work to bring up a multi-node cluster. I tried to do it on Play with Docker, but there's still some issue with because Play with Docker uses Docker in Docker. I'm getting a bit complex here, but there's still a bug. But I talked to the guy who invented K3S after his talk about this, and they're aware of it and looking for a fix.
Is there a reason not to use K3S for your Kubernetes?
To me, it seems like what Docker's trying to do with Docker EE eventually, right?
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was something it couldn't do, like because they stripped all that stuff out. Besides the alpha beta, can you just run it on EC2 instances and just go into production with it?
That's. I think the reason the title was running Kubernetes at the edge is because they get. Probably being Rancher, question like how can we move it further out of our infrastructure closer to the things we have running in the field,
Can
and they
utilize
said,
those resources.
yeah, apparently they said like much more lightweight and bring up nodes at the edge.
Now, the true test is if this K3s serves like 80% of the workloads,
right.
then what's the other, like,
Well, that's the
what's
thing,
all
right?
the other bloat, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that
yeah.
means that's like an experiment of, like, it's an interesting experiment on the
Right.
complexity of the Kubernetes ecosystem,
Yeah.
and whether that's appropriate for normal workloads, or
Right.
something
Yeah.
like that.
Like if
right?
you're
Maybe
only-
you can go to k3s.io. So that's the that homepage. Kind of a list of what they stripped out, and then a couple of things they added, which
Interesting.
sound like
Are they open sourcing that?
yeah,
Oh,
it's all open source. Yeah. Started as a joke, but then the GitHub stars went ballistic, and now it's one of their most starred projects, even above Rancher OS.
So it's kind of like it's not even Minikube. It's better,
No.
it's more robust than that.
No, it's indeed
Minicube's
it's
on
multi.
one server,
yeah,
right?
it's multi-node, and there are
Interesting.
already kind of offspring projects K3D, which is for the D stands for development, and that I think tries to replace
Minikube?
Minikube.
Interesting.
So scrolling down
Oh, okay.
a little bit.
Huh.
Why? What this is?
is this?
Okay, so here is a list of the things they
Oh, and it does
removed.
ARM. And it works on ARM.
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Storage drivers, cloud providers, Docker. Yeah. Okay.
In-tree storage.
So this is like if you took a car today, and then all you needed was a thing to move you.
Yeah,
And you just
from A
took
to
off
B.
all the parts.
Yeah.
That you didn't actually
Yeah.
need to
Like
move
heated
you.
seats.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Whatever. Yeah. We
Rear
don't
view
really-
mirrors.
We don't really.
You're only moving
Radios,
forwards.
climate control,
Yeah.
like 10 speakers, surround sound,
Windows.
like bucket seats,
Yeah.
all that stuff. You took all that out, and you still have
still got there.
2/3 or a third of the thing, and you can still get there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Interesting. That's something to track, huh?
I remember when I saw his tweets about it, and I was like, "Is this real? Am I being punked?"
No, it's
So it's
real.
a single binary. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
really cool.
Yeah, you
Interesting.
just download it, like no install
So
whatsoever.
this is what's interesting is like, I mean, all the original founders, right, of Kubernetes keep talking about how it was a thing meant to help you build other things on top of it, and what if this was actually the thing? Like, what if this became the default deployment methodology
Yeah.
instead of the raw upstream?
There's been, and I'm no expert of the politics of the Kubernetes ecosystem,
Yeah.
but that has been a source of constant contention of
Yeah.
what's in and what's out, and what gets in and what gets out of that ecosystem.
Sure.
Where that line has moved, and is actively being debated in that community.
Right. What don't we solve? What problems?
Yeah, and jury's still out, obviously, and probably forever.
Yeah.
But it's a valid thing. It's good that there's an ecosystem around that. I mean, this is why open source works. That
It's a discussion.
Rancher can fork it and then say, you know what, let's experiment with actually going on one extreme.
Right.
And then there's other folks in the Kubernetes community that want to go the other way, right? And
Yeah.
add as much.
Have everything.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
They want to replace all their systems. Yeah, I mean that's what Kelsey Hightower had a good tweet where he was like, if Kubernetes was ever going to fail, it was going to fail because it tried to do too much. And that's an interesting.
And so this
problem.
is kind of a proof point
Yeah.
on that, right?
Yeah, and maybe it doesn't ever fail. Maybe it just means that the upstream becomes less common as the raw
Yeah.
way to deploy it, and then you just end up with all these distributions. Like, very few people actually build their own kernel and then manually download their own
That's the
packages.
whole-
They
yeah.
usually use a distribution.
Okay.
That wasn't always the case, but now maybe with this we'll have even less people choosing to do the raw installation. Well, it's very cool, and I did not realize that there was a session on it. I wouldn't have
No,
been able
me
to make
neither.
it.
'Cause
But
the title was completely off, but
so yeah, we'll probably have to have another discussion once that video comes out. We can all watch the
Yeah.
video and learn about it.
Yeah.
It's definitely one of the more interesting projects in the Kubernetes world.
Right.
In my
Yeah,
opinion.
absolutely.
I would say that the main thing at DockerCon this year is a focus on the developer. We haven't even though we just spent the last 10 minutes talking about Kubernetes.
Yeah.
That wasn't really the focus, I think, of this year's DockerCon.
Right.
It was more about the developer user experience for sure.
Less about orchestration, more about
Yeah.
developer workflows.
Which I think is really, the user experience for the developer is where the exciting things are happening and
Yeah.
where the main pain point is after you've gotten all this stuff running.
Right.
How do I actually work on something that's beyond Hello World and one container
Right.
on my laptop synchronized to an environment, right?
Yeah.
So there was a lot of focus on that, a lot of features in Docker for Windows, Docker for Mac in terms of new ways of deploying your full application
Yeah.
locally and in a more easier way.
Templating, right? Like
Templating,
was
Docker app.
automation, workflows, those
Right.
were like all the
Yeah.
themes of the whole show,
And
really.
underneath some of that is that cloud native application bundle, and which for I would say 90% of the people watching,
at least 90%.
99% of the people watching, it's not really relevant to
No.
their day to day, but the standard that's being developed has the potential to be an underlying way of packaging up complex pipelines plus the actual all the containers that you need to build to run your application,
Right.
and move that around as a package, as a unit.
Right.
So I think there's going to be a lot of new features that come out in the future around the developer experience that underneath are powered by these
standards.
things that are
Yeah.
they're working on now.
Yeah, so that the configuration files can move around and different tools can use them in different ways.
Yeah.
That would be cool. All right, we'll take a couple of questions since we've got a lot of people waiting patiently for a while now. Plugins get updated. Warp has a question about Jenkins, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to be able to answer that. You're asking about rebuilding images and updating all the plugins while building. The plugins get updated through, though they should be in the volume that's not affected. Unfortunately, I'm not gonna have any advice for that one. Sorry about that.
I would reach out to Laura Taco on that one.
That's right, Docker Captain Laura Taco.
Yeah.
Tacho. Cheers from Germany. Hello. Someone from North Carolina. What? Your backyard.
Hey.
Josh says, my company has a NUC server. Should I use Docker Machine to create 3 swarm nodes, or use create one node with the default Docker install? Any resources, tips on LAN Docker?
Long live Docker Machine.
Docker Machine. Yeah. So a NUC is a NUC server. I didn't know that there was NUC servers. I know of NUC as the gaming machine, right, from Intel.
Sure.
Is
Is
that
it like the simple little box
Yeah.
you just put in like a hard drive and you have a
it's like a mini
fully fledged
HSP.
computer?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have one of those, has one, or A. Should I use Docker Machine to create 3 swarm nodes, or create one node with a default Docker install? So if you're trying to use this on your network, then if it's only one physical piece of hardware, I would say just one machine inside it. One
that's
swarm
not
node.
clear in the question. Like,
Yeah.
why would you do a multi-node if you just have one?
And I think that's what he's
physical
asking.
machine?
Like, should he do that on one physical node? Maybe, just because like you could then take down one of the if you had multiple VMs on that thing, right?
It's
It
a
doesn't
pretty
provi-
small box. So
It is-
I don't
oh,
know
is
if
it?
Yeah,
I guess you
indeed,
could
yeah.
run virtual machine. I guess if you're running virtual machines, then yes, you could technically use Docker Machine to
Yeah.
spin up a swarm cluster
Yeah.
on that one box. But it's going to be.
So if
I mean,
it's
do
just
it in the
raw
winter
hardware,
time because it's going to warm up your room, probably.
right? If it's just a single piece of hardware running Linux like Ubuntu directly, then I wouldn't make any virtual machines. Like I would just make it on the
Docker.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's what he's asking. Maybe that's what he means. Just creating one node with the default Docker install
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
host
Seems fine,
OS.
Yep.
Yeah, I would do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Although you don't get health checking you do, but like if you say I want to run this service, 3 replicas,
Yeah.
then you need swarm, right?
Yeah.
But you can
Right.
still.
No, he could definitely do a Docker swarm on
But
that
just
piece of
on one
hardware, but it
node,
would just be a
yeah.
one node
Yeah,
swarm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds
Yeah,
fine.
that's what try that. Hope that answers your question. Any resources on RexRay? Tried using it with Docker Machine, VirtualBox on a NUC server. Oh, this is back to the NUC. No luck. Ended up using NFS4 without Docker Machine.
We have
It is Dino, our special guest.
Speaking of T-Rexes, and Rex Ray.
Is that all? So what do you think about Docker?
It's fantastic.
All right.
But sometimes we gotta be willing to shed the prehistoric things.
Okay. Prehistoric things.
Yep. We have
All right. Does anyone? Let me ask you a quick question, personal question, if that's okay. Does anyone make fun of your small arms?
no,
No.
not at all.
Okay, they're very nice here. Okay, good. Thanks for stopping by. That was. What? So we have the maker of DockerCon essentially behind the scenes here.
DockerCon.
I think this is the 10th. This is the 10th DockerCon that she has organized,
Whoa.
I believe. Which, if anyone out there has ever organized an event larger than 200 people,
Yeah.
can imagine what it's like managing 10 events over the last 6 years
Yeah.
for thousands of people in multiple locations around the world. It's no small feat, and Ashlyn's awesome at doing it.
Yes, and we owe her a huge thank you for all the wonderful things that we get every year in terms of hallway track and food, and like when you see it behind the scenes, you just realize it's crazy.
Yep. Thank you, Ashlyn.
And thanks for being here.
So back to the question. Rex Ray.
Rex Ray, Gluster FS, Rex Ray.
So I don't
you
know
use
what the
works.
I don't know what the current status of Rex Ray is, but if you really want to get a solid answer on this on the Rex Ray, reach out to Jonas Roseland. He's one of the original kind of forces behind Rex Ray.
Yeah.
Worked on what was that called again? I forgot it.
Catalyst, the code catalyst.
Code
Yeah.
Catalyst, which was a project there. So. The reason I'm hesitating on answering that one is
Yeah.
I don't know what the status of how
yeah.
maintained that project is right now.
And yeah, and certain drivers have certain issues, and I know that like in open source, not everything is bug free, right? I mean that's sort of typical. So I've heard people tell me that they have problems with the Rex Ray driver in Azure, but I know people that use the AWS driver fine. I use the DigitalOcean driver and it works fine, but I've had people tell me they've had issues with DigitalOcean driver. So it's one part cloud storage. Like the cloud storage vendors have to make the driver work with Rex Ray, or they have to provide something, because usually some random community member isn't going to just completely create a storage driver for a cloud storage that, it doesn't happen that often. So it's usually they're waiting on someone else. So isn't Gluster FS, is that the one that's done? Like are they? I remember there was a storage driver thing that went away. Like they
No, you
basically
mean
stopped.
Cluster HQ, but I think
Oh,
I haven't
okay.
read the question, but is Gluster with a G, right?
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
that's another project. So that's a bit more old school. I
Yeah.
don't wanna
But that's a file
rant on it.
synchronization. solution.
Yeah, indeed. So it's not really native to the container or orchestrator world, but it could work. Like you could have a file system that's kind of shared on all your
Right.
Swarm or Kubernetes nodes, and then containers running on every node can access that file system like together. So
Right,
it's kind of a
which is a
but-
different type of solution than just a storage driver to get you
like
storage off the
I
server.
think I'm also not super familiar with Rex Ray, but I think there's I guess what they do, for instance, if you're in AWS, like they have your data volume follow your containers, like
Yeah.
they reattach it to the node
Yeah.
that container is running on, while Gluster is more, I guess you can compare it to Amazon's EFS,
Yeah.
like a big hard drive that's accessible from every instance that exists.
Like Ceph, is it similar to Ceph?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, so there's different solutions to, in a way, get to the same end
Yeah,
goal,
so Rex
I
Ray
guess.
and Gluster are two different things.
Also might be a Docker machine thing.
And I don't know. I mean, Docker Machine, I wouldn't use Docker Machine, because Docker Machines that are created in VirtualBox are tiny little VMs that aren't really full OSs. I mean, they don't have like Ubuntu installed. So that's the first thing I would look at is, your OS might be the wrong one. Yeah, someone's talking about the quality. Sorry, we're conference Wi-Fi. Hopefully the audio makes it through at least. All right, question about server on a local network. The stack has Grafana on GitLab. How could you provide DNS on the local network? They use the same IP but have different ports. Is this possible? How could you provide DNS in the local network? Well, typically your DNS is going to be somewhere else, and you would update that and point DNS entries to the servers where your containers are running. So I don't see how Grafana and GitLab are related to DNS. You're going to need to update that somewhere else. I don't know if you're asking if there's a built-in feature of containers to update DNS, but there's not. So.
The answer to that is proxies. Run a proxy, have a DNS server with records pointed to that proxy, and then use something like Traffic that automatically configures the proxy with whatever containers like GitLab and Grafana you have, and it automatically manages the ports and all that stuff, and mapping of routes to those containers specifically.
There's also Core DNS, another CNCF project. I know, getting back to K3S, but that's one of the things they added in. So they stripped out a bunch of stuff, but then added in like other features they thought, why is this
necessary?
not in Kubernetes? So Core DNS is one of them. Flannel also, but no.
But does that only provide DNS resolution inside the cluster?
I think so, yeah.
Kind of like what Docker networks do.
You still need a proxy.
From the outside.
From the outside world, you need others like ingress solutions, but I think within your cluster, that could be a solution.
Helps you get around.
Yeah, not very educated answer, but
someone asked, do we have auto scaling in Docker 3.0? Well, on the
That's
Kubernetes
a question that came up a lot. Like also in the workshop about Swarm, like auto scaling still seems like.
Well, because Kubernetes does provide some of that out of the box, it's like I think people expect that other things are going to do that. So I think the answer is Swarm hasn't changed. Like I'm not really sure what you're asking about. Kubernetes, Swarm, Docker Run, like Docker EE versus CE, like what the question is. But Kubernetes in Docker Enterprise does still have auto scaling built in, so you can do that. Swarm does not. So. And that hasn't changed.
Out of the box.
That was
as far as we know, it hasn't changed.
That didn't change before 3.0, and I don't believe that's changed in 3.0.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's not anything they mentioned today about that, and we don't actually have the beta of 3.0 yet, so we can't really play with it.
I also think doing these things like load balancing. What was the word?
Auto scaling.
It's, I think, a bit misunderstood because it's really hard to get something to auto scale correctly.
Yeah.
It's not just let's look at some CPU and memory graphs and when they hit a certain threshold, add some stuff in, because that's usually like there's a reason your CPU is going up, so you just
unless you're already
I
in that
also,
problem.
Anytime you talk about scaling automatically in any kind of direction, and you have data, that's you first have to tackle your application thing. Like how your application is going to handle and your load balancers and how you're going to handle state and transactions. It sounds nice to be like, oh, there's a button, let me just click auto scaling and that's going to solve this problem for my application. But that's not true. It's just a way to make more copies of whatever you want. You're telling it, make more copies of this thing, but your application has to handle what that means.
And it's
otherwise, you could
which is still the hardest problem.
And you probably move the problem because you can add more application containers or nodes with containers, but then you move that extra workload to your database, which suddenly can't handle all those connections of the new containers, and so it's not, to me, it's not just a feature of an orchestrator. Like it's something you need to think about and how it applies to
it's a hard problem.
Your application, your company.
Even if you had the feature in the orchestrator, which you can do it with Swarm, you just need to add something else on top of it, like Prometheus, to monitor and then talk to the API.
For one very cool example I once heard at a conference was a British company called U-Haul, a bit Uber, let's say, kind of taxi hauling service, who auto-scaled based on the weather. So they had API calls to a weather service. So, it's going to rain in London now. We need to already warm up some nodes and more application containers because we're gonna be swamped otherwise.
Have more traffic.
That's a very specific auto scaling solution for
that's a
their
journey
need, for their business.
And that's a journey to get to. Like you don't just turn that on in a day. You have to solve a lot of problems to get there.
Correct.
Exactly.
Correct.
Good question though. Let's see. Can you make the look?
Well, now that you
Oh, he's
They're
answering.
the
He's
questions
answering a
for
question.
that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Warp, for answering those questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, hello, Kylix.
Hello. He's somewhere. He's behind us. He's hanging out. Oh. Trying to evaluate. I'm trying to evaluate Docker Desktop Enterprise, and I can't find it anywhere, even if I am subscribed to beta for a long time. Is there any additional link available? No. I haven't seen a public beta of Docker Enterprise Desktop, so I don't know that it exists
We haven't
yet.
gotten access to it as
Yeah.
captains yet.
So yes, we don't have it, which means you probably are going to have it yet.
Yeah.
And we don't know. And we don't know. Yeah, we don't know when it's going to ship. We haven't been.
And can you test it before even talking to Docker? Like, is there a download of like, or do you first?
Yeah,
have
I think
to-
he's saying he's been signing up on beta. Like last year, they announced the betas, and people signed up for them because they announced desktop GUIs a year ago at Docker.
Oh yeah,
Docker
true. Yeah.
last year.
But they did mention them during the keynote again.
Yeah,
Or
and
am
then I don't know if they mentioned them in. I feel like they announced it at Barcelona.
Yeah.
They announced it. I don't know if they said that there's a beta sign up, but they announced it. So now they've announced it again, and there's a beta sign up, but we don't have bits. So hopefully soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let us know.
Soon is the best we can give you. Love the chopstick mic. I'm glad you recognize the chopstick mic.
Getting more professional every year.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
You're welcome, Josh. Hope those answers helped you.
Yeah.
How do we best contact the Docker captains?
Almost always on Twitter.
Yeah.
Like I think every captain is on Twitter.
And also on the Docker community Slack.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
there's
if
a
you,
captain's page with everyone's Twitter handle, email.
Yes.
I think most of our DMs are open.
yeah,
would
I think
imagine.
if you just go to docker.com/captains, it gives you a list of all the captains, and I believe it has links to all their
Yeah.
information there.
And
so
where they live.
yeah, maybe where they live, maybe
Yeah.
their country or their
Yeah.
at
the
least their
country,
company.
At least
Yeah,
a
not the
time
address,
zone,
yeah.
some
Yeah.
kind of time zone.
Yeah,
indicator.
yeah. So, but I'd say most of us are Twitter. So, I mean,
Yep.
obviously there's lots of Brett Fishers on Twitter. There's probably lots of you all on Twitter.
Sure, the Brett
but when you
Fisher.
go to our profiles, you can actually see that there's activity and that we say Docker about 100 times a minute. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
all right. Yep. Oh, yeah. Ray's in there.
Ray's doing it. Don't tell him my DMs are open.
All right. Yeah. Twitter
Well,
community
if,
Slack.
If you abuse the DMs, they close. So don't
Yeah.
abuse the DMs.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You can always say no, delete.
Yeah.
All right, so we don't have any more. We're caught up in the chat questions. So if you have one last question, get those in. We'll take those at the very end. Anything else this week that you want to talk about as we wrap this up?
No, I think, there's a lot of cool stuff going on.
Yeah.
I think one area in the future to take a look into, if you're curious about the evolution of this ecosystem, is service meshes.
Mm-hmm.
I think are going to be coming a thing next year or later this year, and they're pretty complicated. So like Instio is the main open source kind of service mesh application. If you're a little bit masochistic and curious, definitely check it out and see what that provides you.
Or I saw this tweet. Was it the same guy who built K3S? I don't know. Like someone who said install Linkerd, which is another service mesh
Yeah. Oh,
yeah,
offering,
yeah.
and that will give you enough time to then spend 9 months on understanding Istio.
But
Do you have good quotes? Do you have like a solid quote that we heard? Like any?
oh, from the week?
From the week.
Sprinkle pods. Sprinkle pods. Sprinkle pods. That's all.
Yeah, that's. I think that's the code name for Docker Desktop Enterprise, probably.
So when we see sprinkle pods, that'll be. I mean, they have a logo and everything, so it's got to be a real thing now.
Oh man.
Yeah.
No comment.
So we know that next year's DockerCon is in Austin. That was at some point announced, I believe. Either that or I'm breaking the news.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
Can we talk about? I really
so
don't know.
we'll be back here in.
I
the
think there was an
spring next year.
accidental, like on one of the billboards here, like the electronic billboards.
Oh, is it posted downstairs? Okay. Yeah.
Oh, it's going to be.
Oh,
Austin
okay,
next
okay,
year?
then-
yeah,
yeah.
so it's Austin next year.
But there's no
Nice.
EU this year?
Right. So
Yeah,
there's
they're
supposed to be
doing
regional
regional,
events,
yeah.
but we don't know when those are. So.
Okay. Yeah. So like the AWS summits, they're called, I guess. Like they
Yeah. Those
they
those
do
things.
a few in Europe. Yeah.
So, are you going to be at the Fed Summit
Yes.
in DC? When is that?
Oh, so it's not a Fed Summit. It's actually now a regional event. So that
when is
so
that?
if you're in the Washington D.C. area, and we're gonna be in Tyson's Corner, 29th of May, right? So 29th of May, there's a Docker regional event in Tyson's Corner, Virginia. That's near Washington D.C. in the U.S. So there'll be at least 2 or 3 captains there doing stuff, and talks all day. Essentially, it's like a mini DockerCon event.
Okay.
And then they did one in Atlanta a couple of months ago, and they're supposedly going to be doing the Docker's event website. It might be events.docker.com, I believe, and see if there's events in your area.
Isn't that the meetup?
It's both, I thought.
Oh,
but
okay,
maybe,
yeah.
You might be right.
Yeah.
They might not list everything on that site. but-
Another thing we discussed, I guess, during the captain's thingy, like
Yeah.
where to send people to. There's
find
a
stuff.
Slack, there's
Yeah.
there's a forums,
Yeah.
there's Stack Overflow.
There's lots of things. There's
Yeah.
the docs.
Yeah.
There's
You've got to
How can is that Melind Sardana? We just discussed auto scaling, and there is so if you want to do auto scaling on
Yeah.
Swarm, you have to have something that triggers that you trigger the event that makes that tells Swarm
Yeah.
to scale it.
In fact, Alex Ellis, I think, actually put out a really simple example. If you just Google Docker Swarm Prometheus autoscale, he shows a simple example of doing that. There's also something else called Orbiter, which is it Orbiter?
Yeah.
It's an small open source project by a captain that does some of the autoscaling stuff in Swarm automatically for you. For node autoscaling, I just recommend AWS's autoscaling groups, or your cloud of choice with however they do physical node autoscaling, and you can spin up new nodes. The thing is with autoscaling in any case, the hard part is turning off. Like scaling down is way harder than scaling up.
And your application needs to be able to handle
Yeah,
that. Like,
just throwing more resources at a problem doesn't necessarily solve it.
Right. Right. Yeah, because once you have a bunch of web connections to a website,
Let's
and then,
reiterate that one more time. Autoscaling doesn't magically make your application better.
No,
Yeah.
indeed, it's not just a button you switch
not that,
on. It,
not
you
that
need
we're
to think
not
about
that we're
what's going
trying to
on.
talk them out of autoscaling.
No,
But-
not at all. But it feels like people think it's just an on and off switch,
Yeah.
and it's definitely not.
And that's a big thing about databases too. Is like even just setting up a database in a container is much easier than doing it regular. Orchestration doesn't help you deploy applications that are persistent data. Like they don't set up database clusters or database mirroring or anything like that. So for those of you watching and we're talking about autoscaling, realize that orchestration doesn't really go that deep into an application. So it doesn't know Postgres from MySQL from Redis. It just knows there's an app running in a container. So unless we have, what are those extensions on Kubernetes that you can have custom deployment?
Oh yeah, the deployment configs.
No,
the custom objects.
Resource.
CRDs.
CRDs, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's CRDs for that.
No.
I'm not that smart, so we need someone that knows that, or K3s.
Yeah.
All right, so it looks like we've caught up on all the questions. Is there a promo code for the Tyson's event? I do not believe so. I'm not aware of one. They haven't given us one. John, reach me on Twitter and at Brett Fisher, and I will ask the people that run the event.
Yeah.
So if there's a
The
promo
powers.
code.
Great
Yeah.
So
I saw.
we're looking at you, Docker. Make a T-shirt, Docker and Shell. Next year, DockerCon.
What was that quote? It was like a deep.
Oh, you was a tweet, right, in one of the sessions.
Yeah, here it is. It's we replaced our monolith with microservices so that every outage could be more like a murder mystery, which I thought was great.
Right. Inspector Clouseau. I'm the Inspector Clouseau of my container cluster.
That's another thing. So distributed tracing is going to be another big thing, I
Yeah.
think. And that means you have all these microservices now. You have all these containers. How do you actually debug?
How do you track a transaction all the way through?
Yeah, how do you know where those pain points that Nils was talking about, how do you know where they are?
Yeah, you need to.
And so distributed tracing is that technology
So
that does
CI/CD,
that. Distributed tracing.
service mesh, distributed tracing.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
the three big things.
And auto scaling apparently.
And auto scaling. If you don't have it, if you always want it. It's kind of like orchestration in general.
Yeah.
Everyone makes you think you need it. So yeah, very few of my customers actually auto scale. So
Yeah.
in fact, I think maybe one.
I've seen auto scaling on like the very front end
Yeah.
to kind of just have more things that queue up stuff, right?
Right.
But at the end of the day, there's always a bottleneck.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. You could just be killing the database. That might just be the thing you're doing.
yeah, or if you have like static stuff, then you can scale that.
Yeah.
But not many people have.
And now we have CDNs for that. So it's like if you have
Yeah,
static stuff, you just use
exactly.
somebody else's.
Yeah, and
CDN.
it's probably just a DDoS anyway. You're not that popular, so like.
You suddenly don't have new traffic, right?
Just
right.
kidding.
Unless you're a holiday company.
Yes.
You're
Yeah.
retail.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
there are valid use cases, and there are ways. Think of auto scaling in the orchestrator as a tool to do an action that your application would have to know how to interact with.
Okay.
Does that make sense? I guess. Like. Yeah.
Yeah. Got it.
Yeah.
It's a tool. It's
Yeah.
not a solution.
Yeah.
Right. Especially if you have legacy apps, they're usually the least auto scaling friendly. Like when they need cookies and persistent connections and like all that stuff. Yeah.
Auto scale monolith
Yeah.
right here.
Right.
Or WordPress.
Hashtag.
WordPress doesn't auto scale.
Right.
I'm gonna tweet that.
Right. WordPress doesn't auto scale. Well, thank you so much for joining our auto scaling show. We'll be back here next week with the Service Mesh show. No,
Yeah. This
actually,
is a Docker Captain replica of 2, or replica of 3
yes,
set,
we
right?
are in quorum.
Yes.
We have 3 nodes.
Yes.
So I will be back on the internet live next Thursday as usual. In case you've ever been to the show before, it happens every week. So click like and subscribe on the video, and click that little dinner bell thing so you get notified when we go live, and so you can watch come back and ask questions next time. We will not be at DockerCon next week because it'll be over, but we will all see each other at a future Docker event. So real quick, tell everybody where you are on the internet so they can get a hold of you.
For me, it's Twitter. And
What's your Twitter handle?
It's very people aren't gonna be
Spell
able
it. Spell it for the
at
people.
NDEMOOR.
NDEMOOR.
Let's put it in the chat.
Let's do it harmony.
Yeah.
3-part harmony.
Thank you again, Brett, for having me on having us on your live Q&A. You can find me on the internet at Normal Faults, so that's NORMALFAULTS. I'm Nirmal Metha, and if you like having me with Brett, having me on Brett's show, let the folks know.
Let the people know.
Let the people know.
Yeah, give it a thumbs up, and we'll decide whether we have enough thumbs up to get you back.
I'm leaving it to the internet.
And I'm at Brett Fisher, BRETFISHER. Hey, it's on the channel name, so like
Yes.
you know. And I talk on the internet. I'll see you next time.